Welcome to another edition of the Calm Conversation, where we interview Waynesburg University professors, students, and alumni about their path through the Department of Communication and their career. Today we are alongside Professor Beth Merry. It's a pleasure to have you alongside and talk to you about some of the elements of your career and your time here at Waynesburg. You're also our practicum instructor, so this is an example of what we're doing here on the show. I'll first ask you a pretty simple question. In your career or life, who do you think was your biggest influence growing up?
Wow, that's a really wonderful question. I think that the biggest influence on me career-wise was not a person, but an organization. TWR, Trans World Radio, who now we, as the Department of Communication, have a mission trip that goes down to Bonaire in the Caribbean to their station there. I went down when I was 10 years old and visiting the island with my parents, and my dad had a relationship with the missionaries, and so that started me off, and it was the dedication. It was when they opened, and there were these machines that people could send messages around the world on, and then these missionaries were dedicated. They had kids, and they took them out of American school and put them in Dutch school on the island. And they were so dedicated to that, and it was just so exciting to me that really started me on a journey of looking at communications, Christian communications and communications in general.
You've done work like that throughout your career. You've worked for NPR. You've seen the field from a lot of different angles. How much do you think that has helped you to understand the field?
I think a great deal. I mean, I've worked internationally at TWR. I did 2 internships there in college. But I, as you mentioned, worked at NPR station in Richmond, Virginia. I've worked as a newspaper reporter in all kinds of different ways. I've been a feature writer. I've been a regular reporter. I've had to pinch hit sometimes for sports reporters or home reporters. So I've had a wide variety. I take pictures and for all kinds of publications. So yes, that variety has really helped me understand what this field is all about. And I think it helps me help my students, which is the most important thing to me.
I remember one time you were showing us a PowerPoint class in some of the places you've been. You've done a lot of traveling. You have pictures with pyramids and pictures with icebergs and all kinds of different areas that you've been to. What are some of the coolest places you think you've traveled, and what are experiences that you've gathered while doing so?
Well, probably the only place that's really far away that we've gone twice is New Zealand. It's just an incredible place. Totally different topography from 1 mile to the next. The people are friendly and wonderful, and their culture is so rich in tradition. So that's one of the places. Thailand was another place, very exotic. Again, friendly people, fabulous food. One of my other favorites was when we hiked the Inca Trail. We didn't take the train up. My husband and I hiked for 4 days through the Andes Mountains, through tunnels that the Incas had built and steps that they had built hundreds of years ago. And it was physically the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was grueling. The last morning we had to get up at 4 a.m. in the pouring rain and hike in the dark to the Sun Gate. And when you get to the Sun Gate, you have to climb almost a ladder up this stone wall, and then you're supposed to see the sun coming out over Machu Picchu. We climbed that ladder, ponchos on, it was pouring rain, you couldn't see Machu Picchu at all, and then we walked down about 50 feet, and all of a sudden the clouds parted, the rain stopped, and the sun came out. It was amazing.
Experiencing all these different cultures, what do you think is the biggest difference between American culture and some of these other cultures around the world?
Well, every culture is somewhat egocentric, and we are no exception. And I think that Americans could do a lot better at trying to understand and learn about a culture before they go there or even meet people from that culture. So I think that's one thing. Many countries you go to, the people are very warm and welcoming, sometimes not so much, but we've learned a few tricks along the way. And I made sure to choose a textbook that talks about those things. if you try to learn a few words in their language, if you smile a lot, if you ask questions, if you are curious about their lives and their culture, they will just open up to you and tell you things, and you can have a friend around the world, if you follow up on that initial breakthrough.
I found out today that you have a master's in multicultural communication.
Cross-cultural communication.
Cross-cultural communication.
Yeah. From Wheaton College.
From Wheaton College. How much has that given you a drive to see all these different places and see all of these different cultures firsthand?
Very much so. When I graduated from grad school, I actually wanted to be a missionary. But I fell in love with and married a man who had studied in seminary for a pastoral ministry here in the United States. So that's what we did for 20 years. And then he was called on an exchange program to Malawi, Africa for a year. So our whole family went over and lived there for a year. So you never know when God is going to grant your wish.
How much has faith influenced your career?
Oh, tremendously. I've always gone to Presbyterian or Christian universities and schools, and if you're a Christian, I think it influences everything you do.
How long have you been teaching here at Waynesburg, roughly?
20 years.
20 years.
20 years this year.
What do you think is the most rewarding part about teaching for you?
For me, it's leading service learning mission trips. I've taken some to Malawi and to Bonaire, and I just think that students, when they get to see things in person in a different land or a different country or a different culture or in a different situation, like how many of our comm students have been in a Christian radio station that transmits around the world. So I think that those things where you see people's lives transformed in those situations.
We're talking with Professor Merry here on the Calm Conversation. What do you think is the biggest difference you've seen at Waynesburg? Because, and I asked this question to Professor Wilson when I talked to him on this show, who's also been teaching here, instructing for a long time. What do you think is the biggest change you've seen at Waynesburg over the years in your time here?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think technology is one change, just totally different now than it was then. Our equipment is better and more up to date. Our students have learned skills and have skills that they didn't have 20 years ago, 15 years ago. So I think that's one of the biggest changes. And I think the student body itself is much more dedicated to working harder for their career, and we have them do a philosophy statement and a mission statement so that they're ready, we hope, when they go out into the real world to do what God intends them to do.
Last couple questions, and these are probably the deepest questions. What do you think is the biggest challenge that you've faced over the course of your career or life?
Well, I'm a cancer survivor, so that's probably the biggest thing in my personal life. And I had melanoma, and it's gone now, but that makes you sit up and take note of what you're doing with your time and your energy and your efforts, and helps you get your priorities in order.
What's been the most rewarding part of your career or life?
Well, I think the students and interacting with them and seeing where they go when they spread their wings and fly away from Waynesburg. I think it's so easy to keep in touch with them now through electronic and social media that
Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff.
Yeah, I love it. So I think that that's the most rewarding thing, is to see them grow and mature and find their niche.
This is the deepest question. If you could go back in time and give advice to a younger version of yourself, what would you tell a young Professor Beth Merry?
I think sometimes we all get impatient. Maybe that's one of my things. And I think you just have to be kind to everyone. I think I've always tried to do that, but I think the older I get, the more I realize how important it is to really try to understand and listen to people and figure out what they need to tell you, what's on their hearts.
Thank you so
minds.
much for doing this. It was a real pleasure to have you on. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, indeed. Thank you for asking me.
We'll talk next time on the Calm Conversation, where we interview Waynesburg University students, professors, and alumni about their path through the Department of Communication and their career.